Shana Tova. We begin our service with a story that will come back during the sermon, so pay good attention. Honi, the wise one, was also known as Honi, the circle maker. He was a magical guy. By drawing a circle and stepping inside of it, he would recite special prayers for rain, sometimes even argue with God during a drought, and the rain would come. He was a miracle maker. As wise as he was, Honi sometimes saw something that puzzled him. He then would ask questions so that he could unravel their mystery. One day, Honi, the circle maker, was walking on the road and saw a man planting a carob tree. Honi asked the man, "How long will it take for this tree to bear fruit?" The man replied, "Oh, 70 years or so." Honi then asked the man, "And you think you'll live another 70 years to eat the fruit of this tree?" And the man answered, "Probably not. However, when I was born into the world, I found many carob trees planted by my father and grandfather. And just as they planted trees for me, I'm planting trees for my children and grandchildren so that they'll be able to eat the fruit of a carob tree." I want you to think about the message of that story and how that might be a theme for these high holidays. In the meantime, we'll continue our service with a reading. This entire season is kind of backwards. It faces into the past. We look at our ancestors who came before us as if that's supposed to give us strength for our lives. And it's true. Where would we be without those who came before us? I think about Rambam, whose revolutionary work, he took the Talmud, one of our core rabbinic texts, which records centuries of rabbinic arguments, hundreds of years of complex arguments, and he did something unthinkable. For centuries, our rabbis recorded the arguments back and forth, and they left dilemmas undecided with no resolution, and they did that on purpose. Rambam, in one fell swoop, decided what was right. He looked around and saw that amorphous, confusing nature of the Talmud was no longer serving the people of his generation. It was too confusing. It was in complex Aramaic. They couldn't read the language, and even if they could, at the end of their deciphering, they wouldn't know what to do. So he did something radical. He invoked a principle reserved for emergencies. Et lasot laHashem hafer et toratecha. This is a time to do for God. Throw away your Torah. This is a time of great need. He thought, if I don't do something drastic, this tradition will die. We need to move beyond what our ancestors left us. We cannot live in that complexity. It may have been meaningful to them, but it isn't to us. So he simplified. He codified. He rewrote in plain Hebrew. He made decisions where the rabbis were not prepared to. Then, as if that weren't enough, he titled his work the Mishnah Torah. It means the second Torah. He took the Torah, the Talmud, and the traditions handed down for centuries. He took what he saw as relevant, poignant, meaningful, and he dropped the rest. It was unheard of. He built on what they built, certainly. but today we practice Judaism in a big way based on Rambam's work. In his boldness, he left a legacy and made a huge impact. Rashi was totally unprecedented, a bit less radical, but he too looked at the Torah and Talmud and knew there's no way a normal person can understand its complexity. Torah doesn't make sense without context. The rabbis have dozens of resources for understanding what's going on in those dense, foggy pages. Rashi knew them all. So he set about, as his life's work, to commemorate, to commentate on, and to clarify what was unclear. Over almost every page of Torah and Talmud, there's a Rashi text to help deepen or clarify our understanding. And even though his grandsons argued with his conclusions vigorously, he left a legacy and a gift for every person seeking to understand the meaning of what's often a blurry story. Or the Baal Shem Tov, one of my favorites, total counterculture. He was a revolutionary. Before he came, only a few people were qualified as good Jews. Until he came along, being a good Jew was defined by being an academic or a know-it-all. How much do you know? And the one who knows more is the better Jew. Only the smartest, the most learned people were considered pious. He stood up against that in a completely revolutionary way. He stood up and said, no, you do not need to know all of the Torah and Talmud to be a good Jew. You need intention. You need heart. You need to mean it. You need to live a good life, an honest life. Know God in all of your ways. Give gratitude for this life. That is as valuable as all the learning. Judaism has never looked the same since the Baal Shem Tov. He brought what was reserved for the academies, for the ivory towers, to everyone. It was unfathomable to do what he did. When Rambam and Rashi and the Baal Shem Tov came to earth, they were aware that the tradition that they were handed was dead. If they did not breathe new life into it, it would stay that way. Maybe not in their generation, but in the next for sure. So they built on what they'd been handed. They took it, enhanced it, transformed it. And this, my friends, is that time. This is that once in a lifetime event. It's our watch. A few years ago, I spoke with Rabbi Steve Leader from the Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles. He asked me and a group of leaders what we thought the most important commandment in Judaism is. His answer to that question, what's the most important commandment in the Jewish tradition, was nothing short of remarkable. He said, be a good ancestor. I'm going to say it again. The most important commandment, be a good ancestor. That's extraordinary. Forget about looking into the past. If, and only if, we do our job correctly, will we one day be considered ancestors? Will there even be a tradition worth upholding? What do we want to teach them? What legacy do we want to leave for those future generations? Don't just live your life. Be a good ancestor. We, like Rambam, have to take the traditions that have been handed down for millennia, take what we see as relevant, poignant, meaningful, and drop the rest. Yeah, I said drop the rest. I said it. Our sages dropped stoning rebellious children to death. They dropped the death penalty altogether. They dropped rules that keep women from equality within our tradition. We've dropped minimizing and oppressing LGBTQ, and I'm sure there will be others. This is et lasot Lashem, haferet Toratecha. This is the time to do for God. Drop the stuff you made up in the first place. Okay. But how do we do this? How do we do this, Rabbi? All this talk about ancestors. We start with ourselves. Do something that helps you. That's how you be a good ancestor. Instead of doing some old rote rituals just because Zeta did it, find what's meaningful to you today. Do something your future self will thank you for. Our job is to make it alive, to live it, to model it for ourselves. That's what we have to do today in this time. And that will teach a lesson more powerful than the words that we could ever possibly speak to our children. It teaches them, this is yours for the taking. Revamp it for yourself. That's the tradition. Rambam, Rashi, the Baal Shem Tov, they did something unimaginable, heretical. They went beyond what they were handed. They reinterpreted. They said that Judaism isn't in the minutiae. What are you talking about? We'd spend hundreds of years prioritizing minutiae. But they did it anyway. You can't just do it for them. We need to do it for us. And in doing it for us, we model for our kids what it means to keep a tradition alive. We model for them the way this tradition must be treated if it is to stay alive. We model for them that they too must do this process for themselves from generation to generation. We must use our God-given talents. Our tradition teaches that each of us has me'oznei hasechel, internal, God-given wisdom, intuition, and gifts. Each one of us has that built in. Me'oznei hasechel, our wisdom, our talent, to pay attention, to use our God-given capacities, not only to rely on the traditions of the past, but to make it our own. To use our me'oznei hasechel to transform what we've been given into something that applies today, something that will enrich our lives today, that will serve and guide us. What if our ancestors hadn't evolved our tradition? It would have petrified, withered away. And the beauty of this is that you don't need to do it alone. We do this together in community. We cultivate our inner wisdom. We come to be part of this timeless tradition that's passed forward by planting seeds today. And that's what it means to be like Choni, the circle maker, from the story I told at the beginning of our service, planting the seeds today for trees we may never eat the fruit of. That's what we're doing here. Come join us. Be part of and bring your talents to this tradition. Invest in this holy orchard. We're planting seeds for the future. Invest in us, invest in yourself, invest in the future. be a good ancestor. Thank you.